Hello, my name is David Nolan, and I'm the host of Actuary Voices, a podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. Today, I'm chatting with author, academic, and actuary Pietro Parodi, the head of quantitative methods at SCOR, the global reinsurance group. Pietro, welcome to Actuary Voices. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, one of the first questions I like to ask people is how they came to be an actuary, because obviously it's somewhat of a niche profession. And I found that there are very many different ways of getting into the profession. Generally, the common denominator is that people are very good at math and they find the profession one way or another. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your journey with us in some way.
Yes, certainly. Yes, it's been a bit of an unconventional path. But yeah, the maths bit is still true. I studied in a technical high school in Italy. I was studying electronics. So the idea was that I would get a job after the high school. But then I got fascinated by the mathematical aspects of electronics, and I started reading philosophy in the library. Eventually, I decided that I would study philosophy at university. But then my maths teacher talked me out of it and into studying maths. And then my physics teacher talked me out of maths and into studying physics. He used the killer argument that that was the most difficult thing that one could do. And I'm not sure if that was true, but it definitely appealed to my ego. So studying physics, I enjoyed it. I was always more on the maths side of things. And then I moved into AI while I was studying physics. And the reason was that I wanted to go to America. That was my dream. And the one professor that I knew that was always sending his postdocs to the United States was a biophysics professor who also had a machine vision team. So we had a chat, we hit it off, and I liked what he was doing. So I stayed with him from the master's to the PhD. And then indeed, he did send me to America. I went first to Schenectady, New York, where I didn't last long. And then I went to the University of Toronto in the Department of Computer Science. And that was interesting. By coincidence, I was in the lab next to the one of Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner. And I remember that at the time I was quite feeling sorry for him and his students because they were doing these boring things with these black boxes called neural networks. It was very uninspiring. Certainly could not be the future of artificial intelligence. Then I went back to Italy, rejoined my PhD supervisor who had moved to neuroscience in the meantime. And I helped him with the mathematical aspects of it. I was not suitable for the lab, but was doing the maths. And then at some point I got tired of all the jumping from one postdoc to the other and the uncertainties related to the academic career. So I responded to an ad for a job in IT. I thought it was going to be software development, but it turned out to be network administration. But I took it anyway. After a while, I got fed up of it, although at the beginning it was quite fun. That IT job was for an insurance broker, so we're getting closer. And
Yes.
one of the brokers, seeing that I wasn't particularly happy, he suggested maybe you should be an actuary because of your background. And he gave me a book on risk management. I read it. I thought, I could do this with the tools I have. And then what I did was I started, whenever I went to a broker to fix their laptop or installing some software, I would tell them, if you give me some data, maybe I could do some actuarial analysis for you. And strangely, some of them took the bait. After a while, they started taking me to clients' meetings and even to London. So I was quite happy about how things were going. And then the top management called me in and they told me that do the job that we hired you to do.
Imagine that.
And that was the end of that particular road. I sent a CV to a recruiter in London. So far I had been in Italy. And it was 2005, the recession. There was no recessions yet, no Brexit, of course. And there was a shortage of actuaries. So very quickly they responded. In about 3 weeks, I had a job and spoke with my wife. As a kid, had lived in America for a few years. So she was immediately quite open to the possibility of moving. So we moved our family, us and the 2 kids that we had at the time. We went to London. I worked as a reinsurance pricing actuary. And from that time on, I've always been working either as a pricing actuary or something adjacent.
Okay, great. That is quite a journey. It took you quite a number of different places. But it seems to me that Certainly, one of the things that binds it together is you liked solving problems, whether it was network administration, which is a lot of solving problems, or figuring out the best path for your career. So, you mentioned yourself, you have a somewhat, if not very unconventional path towards the actuarial profession. Do you think that having a meandering path helps you in your current role as an actuary?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to me helped, first of all, because I was lucky enough to have a very good formation, both in high school and at the university, but also because I think that in general it's quite useful when someone comes from a different field, because I think you bring innovation. There's a costly way of doing innovation, which is that you set a lot of time aside for it. But the cheaper way is that you've been in another field, there's some techniques that are common currency there. And then when you start being an actuary, you say, "Oh, I could use this tool here," and then you automatically you bring something new to the field. I saw that happening a few times in my career, so it definitely helped me, and it helped me also build myself as a methodologist in a way, because I was always bringing something that was slightly new or unconventional.
Sure. I think I've heard or read that you describe yourself as a more of a technical actuary, and as you just mentioned, a methodologist, rather than a traditional pricing actuary. How would you describe that to an audience with a bit of inside knowledge and who listen to actuarial podcasts?
Certainly. I see myself primarily as a pricing actuary, but yes, of a special type in the sense that in my current role, we try to help actuaries with the right methods. We are ensuring that the pricing models that they build are consistent among them, that they have all the transversal methodologies that they need, for example, rate change calculations. But at the same time, we don't just advise or prescribe. We participate in the building of these models as well, in doing pricing for specific clients, because I believe that if you're not in the fields after a while, things dry up and that you're not really helpful. But that's the main difference, I would say.
Have you got some examples of questions you might ask a traditional actuary might not think to ask?
I would say that mostly we tend to ask the same questions that they ask, but we set aside some time to actually answer them while they might be busy moving on to the next client, next project, etc. So they will not always have the time or sometimes the interest, for example, to streamline a pricing model, right? To
Mhm.
make it more efficient or to add a methodology to answer the need of a particular category of clients. I see more the difference between that time aside than in
Right.
actually doing completely different things. And I also believe it's not just a role, it's an inclination. Some people naturally they price a contract. They also want to see their tool improve after that. So they will spend a bit more time. That's what I've always done from the beginning. It's just that now I have also a role that allows me to do that.
Okay. I think it's reasonably well known that actuaries now have access to more data than they have ever had in the past, and more and different ways of shaping it and chopping and changing it to figure out how best to use it. But do you think having all that data actually leads to better pricing or better results for clients?
Well, I think that data can certainly help getting more accurate pricing. That's what happens, for example, in personal lines. If you can add more risk factors or rating factors, you gain a competitive advantage on your rivals. And so that's one way of say, adding complexity to your model that actually allow you to price better. That doesn't mean that a more complicated model will always be better. I would say there's at least one good way of using more data, which is using as much of it as keeps you in pace with your competitors.
Sure. And do you find that your methodology often leads to simpler models or simpler ways of doing the same work?
Yeah, I would say that the more experienced you are, the more you start appreciating the advantages of having simpler models, and especially when it comes to usage complexity or interpreting the results, etc. So I find that in many occasions, even though sometimes you gain from adding complexity to your models, you also lose, for example, the ability to compare different clients, compare clients year on year, because you have a lot of parameters that dance around. It's not clear which is driving. So, to give you an example, in pricing liability, there are certain distributions with multiple parameters that we use to, and they are the right ones to use because of theory. And theory tells us. But sometimes it's useful to just have a single parameter, use a simple distribution like a Pareto distribution, which then allows you to see of this segment that alpha parameter, that other segment will have something different, and you immediately orient yourself a bit better. So there is always a trade-off between the accuracy and the benefits of
Sure.
simplicity.
You mentioned black boxes earlier on in relation to a different topic, but they're something that many actuaries warn against because many of the models, except for perhaps those who create them, and even nowadays,
Mhm.
even for some of those who create them, still can't actually see how they're working. How important a role do you think transparency plays in using models?
It's paramount, especially in insurance. Underwriters need to understand what a certain product is cheaper than another, why you should charge lower or higher premium. So I would say that while things such as neural networks have been used and can sometimes be extremely effective, there is some resistance to the use, and for very good reasons. So I would say that you can use a lot of methodologies, sometimes having even complex models, and that's fine, but losing interpretability is a big issue. You want to see what you're doing. So I would not advocate for using some of these machine learning techniques that we have, such as neural networks. There are plenty of other techniques that are very, very good as well, and they don't have that problem. So
Well,
I see that would probably be my preference. Even
sure.
the traditional methods, like
Mhm.
generalized linear modeling, can be very effective, and there's no reason to give up interpretability just to have something that is maybe the more widespread.
Let me take a moment to remind listeners that you're listening to Actuary Voices, a podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. On this podcast, we talk to Academy volunteers and leaders, as well as friends of the Academy, about what inspires them about their work, both professionally or as a friend or volunteer with the Academy. Please subscribe to Actuary Voices on your preferred podcast platform. And now, back to my conversation with Pietro Parodi, the head of quantitative methods at SCORE. I don't know if you coined the phrase, but I've certainly read places where you used spurious accuracy. Could you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that and why actuaries should care about it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I definitely didn't coin the phrase. Maybe I became a bit obsessed with it. But traditionally, the spurious accuracy is when you have too many significant figures than you can afford. For example, if you calculate your BMI and because there's a fraction, a square, you end up with a number with 5 decimal figures. But then you know your weight plus or minus 1% of your weight. So most of these decimal figures don't mean anything. You just keep them just to give an impression of precision, but that is not really there. So that is the traditional way in which it is used in statistics. I would tend to use it a bit more broadly, that in a way that is more attuned to machine learning. In machine learning, there's this idea that models have a right amount of complexity, right? There's always a trade-off between the systematic error that you make because your model is too simple. It just doesn't capture the features of a model, the main features, and having a model that just is too complex and just overreacts to the noise in the data. And there seems to be a sweet spot where you have an optimal complexity that your model needs to have. So I would say that when you move beyond that sweet spot, you are adding fake accuracy, spurious accuracy, because you're not really improving the prediction accuracy and the explanatory power of the model. And then, even more in general, when you try to add more bells and whistles to your model just because you want to make them look more like reality, and because you know that these things matter in reality, so you want to put them all, but you're not able to have enough data to substantiate the use of these extra parameters. That to me is spurious accuracy.
And do you generally find that when you point this out, that actuaries are amenable to returning to the previous level where there is this sweet spot?
I would say actuaries are more and more willing to do that, probably because there's more and more education about machine learning, which has brought a lot of clarity to the profession, I think. Beyond the techniques that he has brought really a theory of modeling and what is a good model and why. And I think that there's more education about it. But there's always pressure from the underwriters or from our natural inclination of trying to show that we have captured anything that needed to be captured that can take us away from that. And to be fair, there's also always reasons that go beyond the prediction accuracy, why you might want to have more parameters, for example. You might need a more complex model because you want to explain how something works, right? Imagine you want to explain how the human body works and you want to add as many features that it has as to make it clearer, to make it more informative. But then, you cannot use that to decide the dosage of a drug because it's just therefore to explain things, not to predict.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I want to move on now, if I may, to a not insignificant fact about you is that you're an author of a widely read book called Pricing in General Insurance, which I believe is in its second edition now. What motivated you to write that?
Well, first of all, there was the occasion, right? Because I started lecturing as a part-time teacher at a base business school in London, and the general insurance pricing course. So I started handing out notes to my students, and over the course of 2 years, these notes became quite naturally a book. But first of all, there were no other textbooks that I could use. There was no book on general insurance pricing, and also because I care about making an impact on the profession. And my experience is that when there is a book that is written in a certain way, that is one of the things that has more impact on students or practitioners if it has some features. And I had certain type of book in mind that had inspired me as a young student, and I was in a way trying to emulate that style and write something that could be understood, was easy to read, was light on formalism, but was very practical and could help both students and practitioners. So that was the motivation.
So you would describe the main element that makes this book somewhat unusual is that it is very relatively simple and practical with everyday examples, yeah?
Yeah, I would say also that it was written in the way in which books that I understood and appreciated as a student were written, so that they would explain the problem, first of all. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And then try to explain in a very intuitive way the core concepts. And then do a lot of examples to really make it clear. I was trying to do that. And there was in opposition to other textbooks in maths that I had read or tried to read. They were very axiomatic, axiom lemma, theorem corollary, and they were very dry and it wasn't clear what they were trying to achieve.
Sure. I suppose if we translate that to the novel form, it's a difference between Proust and Italo Calvino or somebody like that.
Yes, avoid sentences with 10 rows.
Yes,
And
exactly. And has your thinking evolved since the book, or has that been all incorporated into the second edition?
it has evolved a bit despite the fact that the second edition was just published in 2023. Yeah, the main thing that happened for me is that I chaired this working party called the Loss Modeling from First Principles. And the number of issues came out of it that inspired me, and that probably I would include if I had to do a third edition now. So, for example, the why the Pareto distribution is so ubiquitous among when you do claims modeling. And there are deep reasons, and you should always look for reasons for first principles to use certain models rather than just choosing the one that fits the best, right? So, looking at these examples, I would say that if I had to rewrite it now, I would probably add some bits around modeling from first principles.
Good. Well, you obviously take great pride in helping the next generation of actuaries develop and improve their skills. What skills do you think matter most for the next generation that perhaps some of today's actuaries may not fully grasp?
At the risk of repeating myself a bit, I would say that you need to understand the problem that you're trying to solve. You should always have that attitude that at the center of everything, every method, every technique, there are the problems that you're trying to solve. And if you lose track of it, you're just learning disconnected things. The other thing I think equally important is critical thinking. There's nothing that has replaced it until now, and I doubt it will be replaced, but I may be wrong because I've proven to be bad about predicting the future already many times. But I would say if at some point our motivation of solving problems and think critically are not needed anymore, then it's probably the point to go full Blade Runner and kill all the replicants.
Obviously, there's an awful lot of excitement about AI at the moment. And given your early connections to the development of AI and your grasp of actuarial science. Are you as excited as many others, or are you going to kill all the replicants?
I would I would kill all the replicants if the best scenarios and the most optimistic scenarios about artificial intelligence were to become true, I would say. But no, I find it all very impressive. I share some of the excitement. I'm a big user of AI. One area in which I have yet to be impressed is in modeling itself, right? In the latest big wave of AI is large language models, as the word suggests, linguistic models. They seem to have developed some very interesting reasoning capabilities, but still, when you ask them to do modeling for you, they definitely fall short. I don't think that's what they designed to do. On the other hand, other aspects of AI, like machine learning, have been incredibly useful in clarifying what we're doing. Not replacing what we're doing, but clarifying what we're doing. But yes, no, I am impressed and I find it great, for example, for research and development purposes because they have an incredible access to knowledge and great way of organizing it.
Yep, I've currently been very impressed. You put a problem that you're trying to solve into it and ask it for various different ways of getting out of the problem, and it'll come up with 25 different ways, and
Yeah.
one or two of them might actually,
Well,
be very good for your particular issue. That's been useful in that it draws on so much information. You get lots of ideas. Many of
yeah,
them
yeah.
you either don't want to do or can't do, but there's often a nugget or two in there that's really, really useful.
Yeah, it's great at brainstorming and
Yeah,
critical thinking. That's what you still need. But I have, as you say, experience with AI from earlier days. But I must say, we're working in a totally different paradigm
sure,
from the one I was used
sure.
to. Yeah.
Okay, well, Pietro, we've come to the end of, for me, has been a fascinating conversation. One of the features we do have is at the end of each podcast, we ask the guest to pitch a question to the next guest, which means that our previous guest has got a question for you. What is the bigger risk to insurers, overestimating the long term impact of GLP 1s or underestimating it?
Well, I immediately claim that to be a almost total layman. I have no experience in life insurance or health insurance. So I will respond, but as someone who occasionally reads some medical literature out of interest, I would say that I'm impressed by this class of drugs. And in terms of the predictions are, I know also that they require, at least for now, life commitment. So I want to know what impact it will have on the population as a whole and whether we can dramatically change risk estimates at the moment. Because I would wait until the actual data come in at population level and I would change premium slowly. I would not immediately assume that what is true in a controlled data environment is immediately true in reality at population level. So, yeah, I see the risk overreacting to this, if anything.
Okay, well, now it's your turn. What question would you like to ask our next guest?
I think I'm going to be a bit more personal. We always asked about AI, and rightly so, the impact it's going to have on the profession, etc. But I would like to know from your next guest what impact has it had on them and on the way they solve problems in their personal and professional life, and if they see any signs of cognitive surrender, as they call it.
Okay, that is definitely a simple but big question. Pietro, thank you so much for your time today. It was a fascinating conversation and I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You have been listening to my conversation with Pietro Parodi, the head of quantitative methods at SCORE. My name is David Nolan, and I'm the host of Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. Please visit our website, actuary.org, for a wealth of information about the work that the Academy does, including all of our work on artificial intelligence. You can follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. And of course, please subscribe to this podcast on your preferred podcast platform.